From fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, and real therapists. If you submit your questions anonymously online at podtherapy.net, we will answer them on the air. Or you can email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com. Black Mirror Bandersnatch on Netflix has revitalized the choose-your-own-adventure style of storytelling. So to mimic their success for this week only, you can choose how pod therapy ends. You can either A, listen to the end, or B, turn it off. Choose your adventure wisely. And now, broadcasting from Level 9 Studios, that guy is Dr. Jim Jobin. I'm Nick Tangeman. It's time for some pod therapy.
So I've never seen this show that you're talking about, this Black Mirror. I've heard terrifying things about it.
Oh, it is?
Oh, my God. I've heard really scary things.
So here's the thing about Black Mirror. I've only seen one episode.
Okay.
Because I watched it.
Yeah.
And when Laura came home later that night, I was like, oh my God, Laura, I watched the first episode of Black Mirror.
Hold
and
me.
It was amazing.
Okay.
And then her response was, we were going to watch that together.
Oh, that's like a limited series, too. Oh, my gosh.
So that's all I've gotten to watch. I have to wait
until
next time we can
I've
watch
heard
it
good
together.
things. My wife watched it, and we have a policy in our house. I don't watch scary things. I can't do it. So, like, it doesn't happen. I can't watch scary things, dramatic things. I exclusively watch kids' cartoons.
Things?
Yeah, Disney cartoons is about my threshold. Like, there's even scenes in Mulan where I'm like, okay, I'm getting popcorn. I can't do this right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, remind me of
palate.
Remind me of all of this when we get to our A block, which is on masculinity.
Yeah, let's talk about masculinity. So we'll dive right into it. And actually, this is it's one of those rare episodes where we actually get to start with a study. And so this one's really, really interesting. So this week we got a question from our favorite psychology student and future clinical colleague, Kate Keller. And she asked us our opinion on a highly controversial set of guidelines that were published by the American Psychological Association, which sets out how therapists ought to treat boys and men. So if you want to read the report, we're going to put a link to it in the description. Basically, it came out in August of 2018. The APA published about a 31-page paper, and that was in development since 2005. But the paper identified 10 guidelines that clinicians should understand when they're treating men and boys. And so after this was published, this controversy erupted because many people accused the guidelines of being an overreaction to like maybe the Me Too movement and also maybe pathologizing what we might call normal male behavior. So real quick, Nick, what I'd like to do is just kind of run through the background, why they did this report, and then kind of one by one, you and I can take a look at the guidelines and kind of give a hot take as to what we think is valuable in that or whether it goes too far.
Right.
So here's why they did the report. So it explains in the report that the reason the APA is even taking the time to talk about men is basically because it talks about how men have sort of never been considered a unique group in psychology. They're usually like the default, and then females, minorities, or anybody who has something unique about them is kind of singled out and is focused on for special consideration. But the report talks about how men have a lot of problems. Men do crimes, men do violence, men commit suicide, men abuse substances, and all more than anybody else. So the report makes this case that, hey, men are usually taught to be sort of self-reliant, strong, not to show weakness, and that's added to this problem. And it also compounds this fact that therapists often commit gender bias. And in therapy, they might not diagnose emotional disorders in men like depression. And even though men are 4 times more likely to kill themselves, they don't seem to be getting diagnosed properly in a way that would sort of exemplify that problem. So the APA decided to make this whole report. And basically the report is 10 guidelines that they're saying, based on research, these are things that they're asking every therapist to think about and to sort of endeavor to do whenever they're addressing men and boys. Okay? So real quick, I'll start with the first one. So there's 10. And the first one is, they want therapists to recognize alternative forms of masculinity. So basically, this one is talking about how we have sort of this dominant form of masculinity that's in our culture. So that's what's on TV, like Chuck Norris, tough guy that doesn't have any feelings and just scowls at you, or Arnold Schwarzenegger, big buff guy and doesn't get hurt and rubs some dirt on it, that kind of thing. But the report says that therapists need to go out and proactively try to understand that there's other ways to be a man. Think like Mr. Rogers. He's a man, and he's kind and he's interested in people. Or David Beckham. He's a man. He's a major athlete. He is stylish. He takes care of himself. He has work-life balance. He loves his family. And so that's the first big guideline, is they want us to challenge a traditional view of masculinity, and at least therapists ought to become aware of alternative masculinities and be prepared to show clients what those look like.
Okay, good so far.
So far, that doesn't bug you.
No, that makes perfect sense.
Okay, so you're not going to get on the Chuck Norris bandwagon and say, to hell with this. It's
No,
snowflakey.
No. And I don't know, were people really upset by that one? Because that one seems rather benign. I think most people would probably agree with that.
Well, the argument is that we're trying to like soften. And so don't aspire to be a tough guy. Aspire to be Mr. Rogers. And so that there's an argument that's like, oh, this is the feminization of masculinity.
Right.
Which the alternative is, you shouldn't be even saying that. Like the fact that you're saying this is a feminized version of a man is why we need this study. Right. Like we need these guidelines because that's inaccurate. That's just a man. Mr. Rogers is not a female version of a man.
Right.
He's a man.
Right.
Like that's what that is. David Beckham is a man, not a different version of one. Yeah, and so like that's what they're trying to challenge in that report.
And that makes sense. And I think we've kind of seen that shift away from the John Wayne style of masculinity and TVs and movies. Yeah. I mean, we can come up with examples to the contrary of that, of current movies where there's, the masculine tough guy.
Right.
Type,
so we need to kind of teach people that. Yeah. So I think you and I are on board with that one. So hot take to the guideline, APA, so far you're 1 for 1. You're getting the pod therapy support on that one. That's fine.
The stamp of approval.
So far, you got 8 more of these, or 9. So number 2, the second guideline that they came out in this masculinity report is that they say that therapists need to blend other life events into masculinity. So basically here, they're talking about how masculinity isn't technically just being a man, right? Your version of masculinity is individualized, and that could be individualized based on whether you immigrated here, your sexual orientation, if you're gay, straight, or otherwise, if you're employed at a given moment, what stage of life you're in. Are you in your 60s? Are you in your 20s? Have you experienced chronic disease? And 1,000 other things that the APA is talking about have an effect on a person, and those probably need to be considered when we try to help that person become or live up to an image of masculinity, that they want those to be factors in that. Mm-hmm. So far, what do you think of that one?
Yeah.
Again,
no,
not an objection.
Again, well, and again, like this one doesn't seem to be anything that I didn't already know, or anything that was already not a part of my current practice and my role. So
it's interesting to me because non-therapists really were aghast at these guidelines.
Well, we've only got 2 so far. Maybe they weren't so.
But it's interesting because those first 2, but they say this is you're snowflakeifying men. You're trying to tell them that they shouldn't aspire to be a tough guy or they shouldn't aspire to be self-reliant. And it's like you and I think we naturally are already looking at the individual story. So this guideline doesn't seem that jaw-dropping to us. I don't think, at least to me, it just sort of seems like best practices.
Right. No, I would agree.
All right. So the third guideline, so far they're 2 for 2. The third one was they want therapists to challenge power and privilege to deter sexism. And here's their point. So they said, so men do have more opportunity and they have advantages. And that also seems to come with this cultural education that includes sexism and rigid thinking. And so they say men, enjoy these advantages, but they also tend to be sort of indoctrinated with sexism, with rigid thinking. They don't know that there's alternative ways to be a man. They don't, believe that they should necessarily seek to give others advantages. And so the solution here is they want therapists to educate men on the man's power and challenge them not to use it, to share that power, and to help change culture. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Really? Cool with it.
Again, yeah. I don't. Yeah. Why does that surprise you?
I actually have a problem with this one.
Okay.
I do. And I'm sitting here waiting for Laura to throw something at me. But no, hear me out. Hear me out. Hear me out. It's good. So here's my logic on this one. This gets dangerously close to imposing a value. And I agree with that value. I am a progressive person, so I believe that sexism is rampant. I believe that we need egalitarianism. I believe that these are good values in a liberal democracy, and they're good for democratic wealth. And I think that they're good for humans, right? I think that humans do better when they don't, suffer from bias and they don't suffer from prejudice, and we bring to light some of their unseen, unconscious views about other people, right? Whether that's racism or sexism or whatever. What becomes interesting about this is that you're asking me as a therapist to mobilize on behalf of the Republic, to challenge every male client I have, to see the invisible sexism in their life and to put them on defense and challenge them. I need you to not use your power. I need you to share your power with women. That doesn't put my client first. That's not an individual view, right? That becomes interesting.
Okay, I see your point, and I could see that in the sense that, like, if I've got a male client who I'm working with specifically for something to do with addiction,
right?
Like, I'm not going to put on their treatment plan that I need to challenge their masculinity,
right? Or
their idea of male privilege,
right?
If it has nothing to do with the current problem that they're coming to see me.
And it's pretty hard to think of a lot of situations where it's part of the presenting problem.
Now, I do think that maybe we do have a little bit of a responsibility that if that presents itself, obviously, if that becomes part of the issue and then that comes up in therapy, I mean, but that's something we do anyway. Like, I challenge all the clients I work with on anything, even stuff that I agree with them on. Right. I will challenge them a little bit. Yeah. Just to get them thinking.
Elicit
just
insight.
To get to process and insight and all that.
I like that, but this is where I did have I choked on that one a little bit. Like when the APA is saying best practices includes imposing a value, it immediately sticks in my craw that, listen, I trust my colleagues to discern carefully when they should apply a standard and when they should not. But it is dangerous when the APA from on high presents these values and says you should do them. And it starts with saying the reason we're doing this is because a lot of therapists are bad at treating men. We're doing this because a lot of therapists have a weird bias with men where they don't see their weaknesses, or they don't present diagnosis for depression, or they also get roped into toxic masculine stereotypes, the therapists do. And we're talking about a field that's like heavily dominated by females that a lot of male patients don't necessarily feel, like they would be heard or understood by. And we're teaching those therapists, hey, you know what we really need you to do? We need you to get in there and school this dude on the Harvey Weinsteins of the world and in masculine capitalism and how we need the feminist resurgence. And it's like, I don't know that that's the place of the therapist. I think that that's the place of a sociologist. That's the place of culture. I think that asks me to have an agenda that I inherently don't feel comfortable having.
Yeah, no, I get that point.
So that one kind of stuck in my craw so far. But all right, so I'm going to score them 1 for 3 in my book. It looks like it's 3 for 3 for you. All right, so number 4, the fourth guideline that the report came out with was that therapists need to understand male relationships. And so here, the APA is saying that men tend to avoid intimacy in part because they're taught that it's not okay. And so they want us, the solution then is for us to help men see that it is masculine and it's okay to have intimate relationships that are vulnerable with others. And that's an area that they really want us to challenge because they see that is being an area men don't necessarily do naturally.
Right. And I think part of the issue too is, this is geared directly towards therapists.
Right.
So assuming that you are using these best practices rests on the assumption that the person is already in therapy.
Yes.
So to some degree, they're already challenging some of this.
Yes, good point.
So, that's kind of the other side of this too, is that like men, I think, do have a higher resistance to going into therapy.
Right.
There is more of a stigma, I think. I'm completely pulling this out my ass.
No, let's use anecdotes.
But, anecdotally.
We're not researchers, we're therapists.
Right.
So in your professional experience.
That's what I've seen is, a lot of times men struggle with that more going in to actually ask for help more so than women do.
I've seen that too. And I think that men oftentimes, if you ask a male patient, who's your best friend? a lot of the men I know that I work with are either don't have an answer to that, or they even feel uncomfortable using that language. Whereas if I've asked female, I always ask about the relationships of my patient. Like I want to know who's in their corner, who matters to them. But it's interesting because I'll ask females, who's your best friend? And they might say, oh, Veronica's my best friend. I'll go, okay, so does Veronica know about what's going on in your life? What brings us here today? Yes. But if I ask a man, and if I say, who's your best friend? He goes, Victor. And I'm like, does Victor know what's going on? No. I would never tell Victor what I'm telling you. Like, I don't want anybody to know this.
Okay, so that's really interesting because when you ask that, like if you were to ask me, who is my best friend, I would say...
It's a big moment, Nick. Yeah, I hope you're going to nail it.
Well, I'm not. I'm not going to give you the answer that I think you want. No, I mean, in my mind, automatically, my mind goes to, what am I in fifth grade?
To have a best friend? Right, okay.
I've got friends. So I've got acquaintances. All right. I've got people
linguistics aside, if you were with a therapist and they said, who's your closest friend? And you start identifying your closest circle.
Okay, yeah.
And they said, do any one of those people know about the challenges that have brought you into therapy?
Okay.
It would not be shocking for a male patient to say, well, no.
No, and I agree.
Yeah, I'm not vulnerable. I don't tell them that.
I would agree with that.
Because I don't want to be a burden to them, or I don't want to seem weak.
But you think women do? You think women would communicate that more often than...
Anecdotally, right, not as a researcher, as a therapist, it is not surprising to me whenever I ask that question to female patients that they would tell me, yeah, there is somebody in my life who I've shared this with. It might not be a bestie. It might be my sister. It might be, my mom knows. It might be... I've shared this with my coworker who's a good trusted confidant. It usually isn't the case that they are suffering alone. Now, of course they can, but what the report I think is talking about here is they're saying, hey, we suspect that men tend to be avoidant of vulnerable relationships, and as a therapist, we need to be trying to challenge that and making that something, A, we come in with knowing, and B, trying to, nudge them toward that, which I actually really agree with. I think I've noticed that in my practice a lot. So 4 for 4 or 3 for 4. So the fifth one, positive. They want us to promote positive fatherly involvement. Now this one I found really interesting. Okay, so basically in the report they said that something to the tune of like 80% of American dads are involved in their kids' lives. But when they survey those 80%, more than half think they're not good at it. And so men tend to defer to a mother. When it comes to the kids, they usually report feeling inadequate to help the kids or to know what to do. And the APA wants therapists to encourage men to like be more active fathers and to adopt like more nurturing tendencies, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah. That research actually surprises me a little bit.
Now, let me ask you, which part of the research surprises you?
80% of American dads.
That was the one. 80% are involved. Did it feel too high?
Maybe a little bit, but I think the other part though is that they think that they're not good at it. I guess that kind of surprises me.
Yeah, more than half report that they don't feel like they're good fathers. Yeah. They don't feel that they're adequate, and they tend to defer, right? And so they tend to not take a leadership role, or they tend to, kind of demur. And again, 20% of them just don't get involved at all.
So maybe I should save this to the end, but I'm not going to. I'm going to kind of jump in now because now it's kind of hitting me with the APA. I think they're on the right track with all these things. I think they're right, but I also think that part of this is a societal thing that is going to be corrected more by society than it's going to be by a therapist.
Right.
Because I think these are trends that we see, just as we see a trend away from the John Wayne style masculinity, kind of going towards like the David Beckhams of the world, and that's masculinity. Therapists didn't cause that transition.
Yeah, right.
That was happening naturally.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think these are great ideas and kind of guidelines, and just kind of. But I think it's kind of like saying, like, hey, try to do these things that are already happening.
Right. I agree with you. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's more of a recognition of culture shift than it is the catalyst of it. But I also do respect what the APA is doing, right? Because I think in 2007, they published a work on minority women. And it was guidelines again. And in that one, they were trying to say, hey, therapists who may not be wise to this, your minority female client has gone through some social background that may give her a unique blend of psychology that you may not be respecting. You may just see her as the next person to walk through the door. But you need to be aware that, and so the report illuminated things and said, here's some things that might be going on in the background for a minority woman or a woman of color. And here's how we want you to kind of like adjust what you're doing to adapt to that problem or to adapt to that reality. So to that extent, I do see what the APA is doing here. But the fatherhood thing is something we don't tend to talk about. Like when you talk about what it means to be a woman, it is almost instantaneous that people will start talking about like maternal instincts. With men, they don't. And I find that really interesting because there's a lot of not just cultural things, but in male clients, a lot of times I have to remind myself to ask about their children. To ask about their fatherhood, because a lot of times it doesn't come up, but it's intrinsic to who they are. But again, it's again this cultural masculinity that says, who cares? Like if I asked you, does Arnold Schwarzenegger have kids? What do you think the answer is?
Well, yes, I know he does.
You know he does because they're Kennedys. That's the only reason I know is because they're Kennedys. But
they have to have kids.
He hasn't been in a lot of movies where he does. But actually, he kind of did break some stereotypes because I think Schwarzenegger did start having movies later on where he was like a dad. Yeah, and there's one where he's pregnant.
That's true. Yeah. Talk about breaking stereotypes.
Yeah, right.
But I do see that a lot with, we see that a lot with actors or how their roles change after they have kids. Great example, South Park.
Oh, okay.
When South Park first started, it was all about the kids.
Yeah.
The parents didn't have a role in it until
Matt and Trey
had kids.
Now that
and they became parents.
Yeah.
Then now the story, if you look at it now, it's like it's a big part about the family and about the parents and
the perspective fundamentally changes. So I agree with this. I think that promoting fatherhood is something that we can do in therapy, and normalizing it I think is really helpful. So far, I mean, the report doesn't make me mad. I don't see the reaction to this. People saying, oh, these stinking liberals want these men to like be good fathers. It's like, okay, that's a family value, right? Like, so if you're a family, valuing person, I think that you would care for this. Number 6 is going to be interesting to me, Nick, because you've worked with foster children a lot and even youngsters. And so I think that this one's going to be kind of key. So number 6 says that they want therapists to support education reforms that help boys basically to succeed. And so in this one, they talk about how, boys are falling behind in graduation rates, in college attendance, in career success. They're tending to be diagnosed more often than would be indicated with ADHD and ADD. And there's this argument of like, are we diagnosing boyhood? Are we diagnosing the fact that, 7-year-old Timmy can't sit still? And like he needs to work with his hands, and are we minimizing that? Have we created an educational environment that tends to play to the strengths of females to sort of like be able to sit still and be able to collaborate and be able to like work quietly, whereas maybe little boys don't stereotypically. And so this point is about the classroom environment and education systems may need to change to fit how boys behave at a younger age, which is really controversial. I mean, that's huge. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, are they saying that boys are falling behind more significantly than girls are?
Yes,
that's kind of the
argument. Comparison. Is that
that's interesting?
The line has dropped.
Overall, I think our education system as a whole
is bad.
is falling apart, and to me, it's all about because that's what you invest in. Like you get a return on whatever you invest. And if you cut investments in education, then your return in that is going to decrease.
Yeah.
And maybe part of this, I'm going to throw in another variable here, but maybe another part of this is how teachers can relate to male students.
Right.
Because if you think back on the classes that you enjoyed the most or your favorite subject when you were in school, it wasn't the subject.
Yeah,
what you really enjoyed was the teacher.
Wow.
Right? It was that personal relationship that you had with the teacher.
Yeah.
So I would be interested to kind of look at what's going on with those relationships.
Right.
How are the boys not connecting with teachers? Are teachers stressed because their class sizes have now doubled?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
well, those are all good factors, but the boy thing, I think, is the zoom in. My wife's a teacher, and one of the things that I see a lot among her colleagues and just among anybody, sometimes, especially female teachers, they're vulnerable to this. They'll encounter little boys and they'll interpret certain behaviors as pathological. And so say that boy has ADHD and that boy has ADD. But if you ask like a man to size up this kid, they'd go, no, that boy is a boy. That's what they do. Like you got to nail them to the chair. Like it's hard and they can't sit still for this many hours and they can't focus in and they're not interested in, and it's very subtle. But like if a female is designing the entire learning environment, whether she's been trained as an educator or not, she may have some implicit bias where she sort of creates an environment that might favor the female mind. And then these little boys don't fit in it. And we say, you know what's wrong here? These boys need pills.
So it's almost kind of saying, it almost sounds like you're saying boys will be boys.
Well, yes, but not in like the terrible context where it like excuses everything they do.
Okay.
When we're talking about little boys being little boys, yes, they're behaving like little boys. And we can talk about culture creating that if we want, whatever. They are, I don't think that we need to punish that. So I think that this was actually a nail on the head moment for me. I liked that the report talked about this. I thought it was really talking about like changing things so that we're, making a more individualized environment. It's funny because you talk about the teacher thing. So my favorite teacher was in high school. And Lauren, I don't even know if you knew this guy. Did you ever have a class with Mr. Curry? He was a biology teacher in science. Did you have a class with him? Old bald guy? He's still alive, by the way. I still get coffee with him. He's in his 80s. So yeah, he's super cool. But Mr. Curry had a special science class called Global Lab, and like we got to leave school. And so like if we were going to learn about marine biology or like something like anatomy, he would take us to the lake. We would rent a boat. We would go out and catch fish, and then we would like open them up and like learn about it. And he would sit there and explain what we were looking at. And it was the coolest class ever. Like we learned about pollution by like going to like the actual water treatment plant and like learned about the chemicals they put in there, and they gave us a tour. And it was only a class of like 10 kids. So it was like this really cool like activities based class, but I learned so much. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember what I learned from books, but like I remember that hands-on thing. And I don't know if that's not an argument for like that's a boy style of learning. I think that's a human style of learning. But you're right about that point about the teacher. And the design of the program really makes all the difference. So I agree with that point. And so far, it doesn't send up any red flares. So the seventh guideline that they're talking about with boys and men is that therapists need to work to reduce violence, substance abuse, and suicide.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
I've been doing this backwards.
You've been trying to increase it, right?
Yes. I've been saying that the answer is more violence.
More violence. That fight fire with fire. If we kill everybody, there will be no more violence.
All right. Moving on. 8.
Yeah. So straight
7
to
was
number
pretty
8.
easy.
But I want to zoom in on that for a second. So in that one, they say therapists need to target that and get involved early. I really agree. A lot of times with boys, whenever they have anger or bullying or behavior stuff, we treat it with the punishment system. We treat it with discipline. And recently, my private practice is near a high school. And a lot of parents are starting to bring me their high school age boys, and they're saying, hey, he just got in trouble at school. He got in a fight, and I'm bringing him here. Instead of just like disciplining, they're bringing the boy in and saying, maybe you need therapy. And I'm really grateful to see that. I want to see more parents doing that. Because with little boys, it goes back to the, boys are boys. Right. If your child is committing assault, if your child is being bullied or bullying others, or gets caught drinking, respond to that. And yeah, I do think that's the proper place for a therapist. I do think we should be trained to get in early and try to deal with that. Okay. I think it's really meaningful. So anyway, I think we both agree.
I never had that issue because I was a little kid.
Right.
I did not become violent because I was going to be on the losing end of that.
You mean you were like a smaller than the other boy?
Yeah,
a lot of boys
I was
become
pretty short. I was.
I don't know. I've seen some boys that's why they become really aggressive.
Sure,
is to sort of be the instigator. That way they can scare the other guy back.
Right.
And I've like had to work with them. Like, hey, you're falsely perceiving a threat, man. Like you're not in danger. But I've seen it go both ways. So I thought that was a really good point. Number 8. Therapists need to help men and boys seek health. So here the APA is talking about how men are less likely to take care of themselves, like eat well, go to the doctor, take medicine, get therapy. And so therapists are supposed to be like challenging that mentality and helping boys and men start being proactive and being healthy. But first, Nick, do you even agree with that assertion that men tend to not pay attention to that?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I know a lot of guys that don't go to a doctor. Yeah. I know one of them very well.
Yeah. You're pointing at me?
Me.
Oh, okay. You don't go to the doctor?
I've had that on my agenda.
This bullet in my
for
shoulder
for the longest time, because it's like I have a job, I get the health insurance. I'm like, all right, cool. I got health insurance. I need to schedule this appointment.
Yeah.
And then I put it off for months and months and months at a time. And then I leave that job and I get a new job.
Yeah.
And then there's usually a waiting period. I don't get insurance for a couple months. Then I get it and I'm like, okay, I need to get into the doctor.
Yep.
And I think I'm going on like 5 years now.
Yeah. Dude, I totally get it. No, you're listen, it's not right. Okay. I'm now looking at the guidelines and I should be challenging you not to do that. I feel
fine.
Yeah. So as your therapist, I'm going to challenge you not to do that. But I totally get it. Like, you're not crazy. Apparently, we're both crazy. I did the same thing. My wife, as soon as the symptom presents itself, she goes and schedules something. And at first, that seemed weird to me. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're a worrywart. And she's like, no, it's called preventative medicine. I'm utilizing the healthcare system to find this problem early and address it.
Exactly. And that's the thing that bothers me, is because I know I'm paying for it.
Right. You're already paying for all this.
I'm not getting
Go use it.
Here's the other thing, too. So when we went to Austin, we stayed at a friend of Laura's, and she had a cat.
Oh, yeah. And you're allergic to cats.
I'm allergic to cats.
Yeah.
Which, talk about masculinity. Like, that's something
that
bothers me. No, because
that you're allergic to cats?
Like you think of all the great men that have died, like Hector was killed by Achilles.
Yeah, right.
And Nick's going to be taken out by a house cat.
Yeah. By Fluffy.
But like, I even at that point, like, I stopped, like, I couldn't breathe.
Right.
Like, I was trying to sleep. And I actually snuck out of their house at like 2 a.m. to go outside
and
just so I can get some fresh air. Like, I couldn't breathe. And in that moment, I'm like, man, I need to get to a doctor right away when I get back.
Right. But did you?
No, still haven't.
No.
That was months ago. I still haven't been there.
Dude, I had a cavity and like it was hurting. And I went and like I got it checked, and the guy was like, "Yeah, you have a cavity." And he's like, so we need to schedule another appointment. It's gonna be a couple hours. We have to drill this and blah blah blah. And I was like, "All right." I didn't make the time to go. I just started chewing on the other side of my mouth because I was like, "I don't have time for this crap."
This is exactly why duct tape has been so successful. Because it's quick, it's easy.
It just solves the problem.
Yeah, it solves problems.
It just holds it together long enough until we die.
Duct tape has made millions off of this male mentality.
Right, that we're not going to fix things.
There's got to be an easier way.
Hold it together. Eventually, I'll die.
Exactly.
If I could just get it to work until then, it'll be okay. It's weird because I get it. Like, I totally get what you're talking about, which is like, well, how many years do I really have? Maybe get 60 more. I mean, I'll get around to this. I could chew on the other side of my mouth for 30 of those.
Yeah.
So, I think that the APA kind of nailed it on this one.
Yeah.
So, number 9 was to catch gender bias. I liked this one. So this goes back to that part where the study justified like why it exists. And it says that fewer men get therapy. Men often report that they don't feel understood by their therapist. And they don't tend to get diagnosed for depression at like the rate that they probably should based on the research. And they're just typically assumed to be okay. Therapists miss a lot of warning signs. And so the APA wants therapists to better understand men so they can see through that and maybe try to like challenge men where they're at and not just make these assumptions. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Very good.
Feels accurate?
Yeah, I think so.
I've actually struggled with this sometimes because, like, we live in an era where there is an appropriate reaction right now to masculinity, and men everywhere are getting put on notice, and we're seeing some very important social upheavals. And again, I'm a progressive, so, like, I'm yes for that. Like, I'm a big feminist. I have a daughter. Like, I'm all about it.
Right.
I was a feminist before I had a daughter. But, like, I really believe in all that. But at the same time, it's tricky sometimes because in our field, it is female dominated. And so like I'll hear a lot of words get thrown around for men a lot, and it kind of causes me to cringe because I sort of think that that's unfair. And I do think it's based on like wrong mentalities. So like if I'm in a group of colleagues, I'll hear them throw around the word narcissism. And they're DXing, they're diagnosing men with narcissistic personality disorder. But I don't hear them doing it to a lot of women. And like as soon as a woman comes in their office, they're talking about ex-boyfriends, they're talking about problems, they're talking about bosses, and like, well, he has narcissistic personality, or he's a sociopath.
Right.
So and I'm like,
that one gets thrown around.
Wow, like guys, what are you doing? Like, you're just throwing this around. It's like, well, that's toxic. He's a narcissist, and it's like, it's possible for him to have male traits like lacking deep empathy or being confident. And you're pathologizing that, right? And so like this point that therapists miss the mark a lot, I personally have seen that.
No, I agree. And that, I don't know. I guess you're kind of making the argument that you see that happening more when talking about males than females.
Well, I mean...
Possibly. But I think therapists sometimes, we can get lazy.
Yeah.
At times, too.
Right.
And sometimes when we're talking to a colleague, it's easier just to throw out a label sometimes.
Yes.
When we don't really actually mean it. But sometimes people do mean it. And sometimes things do get diagnosed and pathologized way more than they should.
It bothers me. Like, I've had a lot of female clients that come in and say, well, my last therapist told me that my husband has narcissistic personality disorder. And I'm like, okay, did she assess him? Yeah. Was this also your husband's therapist? Like, well, no, she told me this. And
using only the data that I'm getting from you.
He has narcissistic personality disorder or sociopathy. Or like I recently had a couple come in and they said that, you know, they were coming in because their marriage was on the rocks and they had tried to go to another therapist for their marriage. And it just didn't feel like it was working because the guy really felt beat up on, and that therapist turned out to be female. And so it just really taught me, like, man, this is very common. A lot of men feel like therapy is not a safe place. It's not a place to be understood. It's a place to be on the defensive. It's a place where people are going to pick you apart, tell you what's wrong with you, call you names. And so I really appreciated that part of the study. I thought, man, that's a great guideline. I'd really like to see a lot of people adopt that. All right, 10th and last. So the last point that the report makes is that therapists need to advocate for systemic changes to help men. So based on how many problems men are having, like in society, therapists should like weigh in and see if they can change education, criminal justice, religious institutions, basically anything that's part of that problem. I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I think this is, yes, we should. I don't know as if it's going to happen on an individual basis,
right?
You know, but I think outside of our regular jobs, we can be an advocate for understanding this and creating systematic changes. But I think the bigger takeaway point for me in all of this is just understanding that we've gotten into this idea in therapy of working with specialized populations and specialized groups.
Right.
But men are never part of that because men are part of the dominant culture.
Right.
Right. Especially white men.
Right.
So it's kind of that group that just like, well, that's just, you know, they're not really a special culture.
Right.
That's just who they are. But we do need to look at, like every group is a specialized group.
Yes.
Every group is important. And every group has these different dynamics and things that come into play when we talk about mental health and emotional health.
Right. So what's interesting about that is there's been a lot of studies recently that have talked about white men and have basically pointed out they are now the number one group committing suicide. And it's not even close. Wow. Like, I mean, they're like 1.5 times the next closest demographic. And so this demographic is experiencing more depression, more substance abuse, more suicide than anybody else. We're talking about white men in America. And yet we as therapists tend to still get sucked in to this cultural debate about these guys deserve to be punished. They don't deserve help. They're the white devil. And it's like, as a therapist, whoever walks into your office for help, we really have to challenge those biases. So, you know, to Kate, our aspiring future colleague and favorite psychology student who challenged us with this question and said, hey, can you guys kind of take a look at that report? I think that we generally do support it. You know, we qualified each tenet of it. I don't agree with those in the news that are saying this is like a feminization of men. I have noticed that the healthiest men that I've ever worked with were the ones that had adaptive and broad views of masculinity. When they had a rigid view or like a cartoon character view of masculinity, I never thought that served them very well. And I don't know if you feel like this, Nick, but sometimes I found myself with men of all ages, sometimes young men, sometimes older men, actually role modeling that it's okay to be a guy who knows about feelings. Right. And like, but sometimes that takes him aback. Like I've had a guy tell me like, you play fantasy football. Like, you seem like a normal guy. You have a beard, but like, you have feelings and you talk about them.
You've got most of a beard.
I have most of a beard. You don't have, that's a mustache. I don't have the mustache. Listen, you're very proud. I knew you were going to use that against me one day. Just because you can grow a full beard.
I've been waiting for 7 years. I just got that
this was
right
my
in my
chance.
pocket.
But have you noticed that with your patients?
About your beard?
You're role modeling you're role modeling masculinity to them sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've had that discussion. Well, especially in when we talk about addiction, because addiction and trauma go hand in hand.
Yes,
and especially a lot of veterans that I've worked with.
Yes,
where veterans, they come back and they're scared, like they've got intense fear and they're constantly on guard. And they sometimes will interpret that as like, this is a weakness. Why am I reacting like this? I'm like, no, this is your body's normal reaction.
Right.
So you have this, especially when we talk about the military and this idea of masculinity,
right,
where it serves them well. And
now it doesn't.
It doesn't. And so it's difficult for them to kind of balance
you'll role
that out.
model that with them too. Like, hey, I get that feeling. I know those feelings. And yet we can be men who aren't, always ready for danger.
Right.
So
and a big part of it is redefining that word masculinity.
Yeah.
And what does that mean?
Yeah, I really agree with that. So great question, Kate. And to all listeners, this is one of the rare deep dives into psychology that we take. There's also another one deep in the index about active shooters in an FBI report. Sometimes we get a chance to kind of put two hands on a topic. So thanks for following us along. But great deep dive.
All right, and we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we discuss cutting grandpa out of the family. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
This week's Theraproducer sponsor is Smitty Scoop.
Smitty.
Smitty was an Italian and naturalized American physicist and the creator of the world's first nuclear reactor, the Chicago Pile 1. He's been cited as the architect of the nuclear age and the architect of the atomic bomb. He's also known for his famous Smitty's paradox, which notices the contradiction between the presumed probability of the existence of extraterrestrial life and the fact that content has not yet been made. If you'd like to support the show and make it possible, you can go to www.patreon.com/therapy and sign up. Again, that's patreon.com/therapy.
Thank you, Smitty, for your contribution to society.
Science. We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy, and our next question is about giving up on grandpa. All right, this one's a good letter here. It says, "Hi to you lovely Pod Therapy guys. Vampire inventor of the wheel, Kayla Lansbury here."
Good. I'm glad she's accepting
Kayla,
that.
are you implying that we make up facts about our Theraproducers when they don't send things in? Have you heard of Smitty's paradox?
I'm offended.
I'm offended by this libel. I have been meaning to write into you for a while, but as usual, life got in the way. If you would like to continue to make up facts about me, go for it. But I figured I'd write into the show anyway. I take that as consent. We're doing that now. My husband's mother passed away in 2014 due to complications from multiple sclerosis. My father-in-law was very lonely over the next 2 years. They had been married for 35 years. He started dating a woman and was very secretive about it, even when we all encouraged him to do what made him happy. He met this woman in May of 2016. They were engaged at the beginning of July of 2016 and married 2 weeks later. He has since completely erased my mother-in-law from his life because his new wife says it makes her uncomfortable. He's gone so far as to exclude his 2 sons and biological grandchildren. We live 4 hours away, so it hasn't affected us as much as it has the family that lives in the same town. He chooses to spend all of his time with his wife's family. My brother-in-law has said that the only interaction he has is when he goes to the grandchildren's birthday parties and then leaves without telling anybody goodbye. His wife does not attend any family functions except for Christmas Eve, where she refuses to speak to anybody. He does, however, attend all family functions for his wife's family, and some of her own grandchildren and her kids even live in their same house. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and I'm extremely protective of her due to the hardships that we went through to have her. Short story, she cost more than both of my vehicles combined and took 4 years through science. Got it. My husband and I have made all the efforts to try to include Grandpa in her life as she is her grandfather. He has done many things to harm this relationship, though, with him that infuriate me. He was a 20-mile drive from our house and did not tell us until another family member ratted him out. He does not answer phone calls when we're in the same town and we ask ask to visit, and the list goes on. But the thing that hit us the hardest was on Christmas Eve. After we drove 4 hours to make sure our family got to see our daughter, he was going to leave without even telling any of the grandchildren goodbye because his wife demanded they leave. So, my husband and I are debating whether or not to cut off contact with his father completely. I do not want this relationship, or lack thereof, to harm our daughter. Since she is only 2, will cutting off all contact with a grandfather she barely recognizes be beneficial? Will it be more harmful for her to find out when she's mature enough to understand that her grandpa is not actually her grandpa? If we do this, we won't even be Facebook friends. Thanks, and salt pork.
Salt pork.
Totally stressed out from the holidays. Vampire Theraproducer, Kayla Lansbury.
Okay. This one, whenever we get any kind of letter like this, or even if I'm working with a client and they're coming in and they're talking about frustrations that they have with a family member, what I always try to do is I try to imagine that family member and try to come up with a theory of all the different variables that are impacting this person's decision.
Okay.
Because we can look at a situation like this, and the obvious thing that most people would go to is, God, what's his problem?
Right.
Why is he doing that? What's going on?
What's up with you, Grandpa?
Yeah. This is like, well, he's just being a jerk. You know,
Yeah.
but I always try to look deeper into this, well, what are those factors that are causing him to make this decision?
Right.
Is it something that he's not giving any thought to and he's just careless about and just like, well, I don't need to see him?
Right.
Or is it something that's actually stressing him out?
The wife.
Like he wants to have contact, but there's something that's pushing him into making these other decisions.
Okay.
Because I feel like if we can get a better understanding of that, then that may guide Kayla or her family in how do you approach this with him? Right. You know, if you can understand some of these variables. And I have a theory, and I could be completely off.
You probably are.
I usually am. And I'm only getting this just from this one letter.
Okay.
But I'm going to guess two things. We've kind of talked about this a little bit before in the past when we talk about divorces, right? Yeah. And how people are in a relationship and they create an identity based off of that relationship, right? Like, so Jim sees himself as being a husband to his wife and a father to his children. If all of a sudden that was gone, we have an identity crisis.
Right. Who am I?
Exactly. Yeah. So from Grandpa's perspective, maybe that was going on. I mean, he was in this relationship for a long time. All of a sudden it's over. He's in this identity crisis. And one of the things that's easy to do when you're in that crisis is to find somebody to get back in there so that you can maintain the same identity.
Right.
You know? Okay. And so he finds her, this woman.
I'm a husband again.
You're perfect. You'll do.
You'll do.
Get in here.
Put me in. Yeah.
I need you because my identity is
a husband
on this, right? And then from her perspective, I don't know what her story is. I don't know what her background is.
The wife?
The wife.
Yeah.
The wife of Grandpa's wife. But one thing that's very telling is that it seems very obvious that she wants to completely cut out any memory of Grandpa having a life before her.
Right. Yeah.
So it seems like Grandpa kind of gets into this pickle in a sense where he's like, I need her because I need this identity, but yet she's forcing me to cut off contact with my family to eliminate these memories that I have of this life that I had before her. I don't know. I think maybe that's kind of where Grandpa's coming from as far as how do you, Kayla, and your family deal with this? You have any thoughts?
I do, a couple of them. So first off, I really identify with Kayla in this one. My father and my mom divorced, and then they both moved on, right? And so she remarried, and he's actively dating. And it is interesting because yesterday, we were filming the commercial at my office. And thank you for letting me borrow Laura. Thank you, Laura, for starring in the amazing commercial. You were great, Oscar-worthy, in fact. But my dad was the other client. And so if you want to stalk me, you can go to my website and see my video. I don't know if it'll be up by the time you guys hear this. But you can see my real-life dad who's pretending to be a client. But that day, he brought in his girlfriend and her entire family. And Yeah, to be honest with you, I had a little moment there because I'm like, hey, thanks for coming. And it's like I'm shaking her hand and shaking her son's hand and shaking her grandson's hand and shaking her other grandson's hand. And it's like, where'd you guys all go today? Disney on Ice. Oh, that's cool. You took her whole family to Disney on Ice? Yeah, it was lots of fun. Your kids would really love it. And I'm thinking like, yeah, if only they had a grandfather that wanted to take them to Disney on Ice. That's interesting. You took her grandkids. Not mine. You're not yours. And so I get that feeling where Kyla's at, where it's like, or Kayla, where you're like, okay. And I've had to put myself in check with that, to be honest, because like my natural instinct feeling is jealousy.
Well, yeah, because you're automatically going to go to that. But then to argue the other side, not everything is going to include both sides of the family.
It doesn't. And you know, the argument that does occur inside of me is like, this is not a singular example. You know, we don't see him anymore. Like he spends all of his time with her family and her kids, and they just started dating. And that's fine. But here's the thing, as I had that resentment, I had that initial reaction of like, what the heck? And you know what? It's almost disrespect to my kids, or it's like not loving them or not being there for them, and jealousy. But Kayla, what I had to do for myself, and I did this through a thoughtful kind of introspective process, is I thought, you know what? What if my friend moved on? What if my friend, you know, got a girlfriend and now spending a lot of time with that person? Good for them. They're healthy. They're having a great time, and you enjoy her family, spending time with them. It's not a zero-sum game,
right?
Where like either your love goes to me and my people or goes to her and her people. I kind of need to allow you to live. And, you know, of course we all have those flickering thoughts, Kayla, where it's like, you know, do I just cut this person out of my life? You know, do I tell them they're not welcome anymore? Am I protecting my kids from negligence or from absence? And I'm going to challenge your logic on that because I had to do it for myself. I wasn't thinking about cutting my dad out of my life, but I did have to challenge this thought because it's not that way. I would rather have 5% of a grandparent than 0% of a grandparent. Mm-hmm. And for kids who don't understand the complexities and the expectations, that 5% becomes important memories for them.
Sure.
And you're right, it's a little bit more complicated because in this sense, we have to treat your daughter almost as if she's adopted, that one day she'll discover that's not a biological grandparent. But I strongly suspect that what will matter to her is not the truth of the bloodline. What will matter to her is the 5% memories that she has.
Yeah,
Those are useful.
I would agree. And I don't see it as being harmful, you know, because that's kind of the question that she's asking. Would it be harmful? Not really, because your child doesn't know anything other than that, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's kind of like I remember back to when I was a kid. My mother's side of the family is pretty big, and I've got like 20-some cousins on that one side of the family. Mm-hmm. All of them lived in the same town as my grandparents, except for my sister and I. Who lived a couple hours away. So the relationship, I only know my relationship with my grandparents.
I don't know theirs.
I don't know theirs.
Yeah, right.
And so it's a lot different. And I realized it as an adult. Well, I wasn't an adult. I think I was in high school when one of my grandparents died, and at the funeral, and you know, just kind of talking about, you know, with my cousins and how this is impacting all of our lives, I realized at that moment, it impacts us differently.
Right.
You know,
right.
I'm going to miss them on holidays, and I'm going to miss them, you know, on birthdays and things like that. They miss them on a daily basis.
Right.
Because they would go over to grandma's house after school.
Yeah.
You know, or they would always stop by. They'd be out playing with their friends and they get thirsty and want some water. Grandma's house is right there. Right. And they have that a different relationship. But the relationship that we have is that's the only relationship we know. So it's not going to be harmful for your daughter. She'll just know that part of the relationship.
I agree with that. And so Kayla, I think in summary, your daughter does not stand to experience any negativity by grandpa's new infatuation with that family and attention to them. So that part, take that off the table, because that paternal instinct inside of you to like protect her from these wounds that you and your husband are experiencing at grandpa, she's not capable of receiving those same wounds. And so I want to just tell you that first, because I think you can let your guard down and not be fearful that you need to push other people away, because you said you are very protective. And I would say she's not at risk of any kind of negativity. And whatever percentage of memories she gets with a grandparent is hers to cherish, and it's hers to value. And as long as he's not a negative, dangerous, hurtful person, then there's no reason to block him out of her life. I would also warn you, I think this is going to get worse for you in a sense, because eventually this kind of person starts like willing their assets to these other kids, and wife makes this case of like, I'm your family now. These are your children now. They deserve half of everything. And things get a little bit more complicated, a little bit more philosophical.
Sure.
And so, that might be down the road, but whatever comes, I want you to have a child-centric view, and a child-centric view from her human little perspective will be hugs, kisses, candy, presents, hi, bye.
Right.
And that's enough. She doesn't know what she's lacking. She only knows what she's got. Give her that, or else she'll miss out entirely.
Because there wasn't any change, right?
No, it sounds like it's pretty much the same.
There wasn't a baseline, and then the event happened, and
well,
now
the baby's
we've got
only
to be normal.
2. She's only 2.
Now, for the rest of the family, there was a baseline.
It's going to be big.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of moving forward is going to be adjusting expectations accordingly.
Right.
Right? We can't, what was the baseline now has changed.
Yeah.
The status quo is now something different.
I agree. Great question, Kayla, and thank you so much for letting me mispronounce your name a bunch and for letting us make up facts about you.
You struggle with that.
She spells it wrong. That's on her.
I don't think so. I think that's right. All right. Well, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we will talk about the challenge of finding a therapist. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
This week's Theraproducer sponsor is Jake Schneider. Jake is one of 17th century Venice's most famous singers. Jake was also the composer of 8 volumes of dramatic vocal music. Many suspect that Jake is the illegitimate daughter of a servant and Giuliano Strozzi, the enlightened dramatist and librettist, who treated Jake as his elected daughter and pupil. Chromatic tensions, expressive lines, and long virtuoso runs mark her style, the flamboyance of which hints at her own vocal powers.
It amazes me how accomplished our listeners are.
He's really impressive, she, in this case. If you'd like to join the party and help make the show possible and tap into special content for patrons only, you can go to www.patreon.com/therapy and sign up. Again, that's patreon.com/therapy.
We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy. Our next listener writes in about finding a therapist. I wish I could accurately convey my frustration with finding a therapist. One of my biggest problems is feeling overwhelmed and hopeless. I'm starting to seriously freak out, and I have to overcome a lot of anxiety and fear just to make a call and become a new patient, only to be told all therapists are currently booked. How effing hard is it to maintain a wait list? Crying and shaking and continuing untreated. Anonymous.
God, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
It's horrible to listen to. I mean, it's just horrible.
It's really frustrating from a therapist's perspective because I was actually having this conversation with Laura, a couple of weeks ago, and we were kind of talking about like, what the hell is the problem?
Right.
Are there not enough therapists?
Right.
And I was saying, no, plenty of therapists, and there's plenty of people who need help. It's the bottleneck in the middle.
Yeah.
It's finding and connecting to the therapist.
Yeah.
And it's like we as a society, I feel like, have made it really difficult to be effective.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of things that we really need to address. And part of this, I mean, this is also kind of our motivation for doing the show in a sense, is, we want to have a more open dialogue about therapy, not just so people feel more comfortable getting into therapy, but if we have more people who are comfortable with therapy and talking about therapy, then that means we have more advocates for mental health.
Yes.
And as we grow, we can actually start creating some kind of social change, and we can address some of these barriers. Some of the problem is like with insurance, where insurance providers, they've got no motivation really to pay for services.
Right.
So they'll say, "Oh no, we're not taking any new therapists. Right? We've got enough therapists. We've got 2 of them.
Yeah.
So that's all we need. There's plenty of therapists out there.
Yeah.
So there's therapists out there,
Right.
who want to take clients but can't,
Right.
because there's no funding source to support it, because they can't get on an insurance panel. the whole thing's just a
Well,
nightmare.
I think you described it well. Like I would, in our particular state, we don't have enough therapists. But generally speaking, I think the profession has enough to meet the need overall, right? But we have the bottleneck in the middle. And it's, again, this broken system. So like I can speak to this in a very personal way. Literally last week, I got an email from somebody saying, hey, I found you on Yelp and I want to work with you. I've been trying to call everybody trying to find a therapist. The shortest wait I can find is 3 weeks. But on my website, I have a live calendar. You can book me tomorrow morning if you want. It's all available for you. You don't have to call a secretary. You don't have to ask permission. Go. Come on in. And it's all available, right? And I'm doing pretty well. Like I have enough people to see in a week, but like there's still some vacancy and I advertise all my vacancy. Come on in, whatever time. And I'm there 9 a.m. to almost 9 p.m. Like I try to be really, really available. And this person was like, oh my God, yes, let's do that. I don't take their insurance.
Yeah. See.
And now we have the reason why there's a bottleneck, right?
Yep.
So here's the other side of the line. Here's the thing that the clients don't see about the professionals. So like I have to earn a decent amount, not so I can live high on the hog, so that I can like buy bread. So like I have a lot of loans. So what that means is whenever I go to the insurance companies, two things basically happen that prevent the marriage from taking place. First, it's what Nick said. They say, oh no, we already have 2 therapists. We don't need any more. And you think, well, that's insane. Like there's not enough therapists on their panel to address all the members in their care. They know that.
Yeah, but they have no motivation to change it.
Because they don't have to pay money if you don't go see anybody.
Exactly.
So if they can meet the legal definition of having people on their panels, and they can say that there's people, or they have hired an agency to take care of it or whatever, then they can say that there's availability. That availability is 3 weeks out, right? And so, but you just have to wait. Well, that's unreasonable, right? But they can say whatever. For them, they can count exactly how many sessions will occur in a year, because there are only 40 hours in a week and there are only X number of therapists. And if every single one of those is booked, they know exactly how much they will pay, but they don't care how many members actually got quality care. So that's the first part, is that the insurances like control cost by keeping a bunch of therapists off their panels. But here's the other way they control cost, which I found out recently. I spent 3 months, I hired a specialist to help me pursue every single insurance panel. I got to the finish line with all of them, but you don't get to know how much they're going to pay you until you get to the altar to marry them. And so I got to the altar,
That's dirty.
Contract in hand, ready to sign on and be a therapist on their panel and help their members. The reimbursement is half of what any normal therapist would charge. And the trade-off is they go, yeah, you're only going to get paid half, but you're going to get a ton of clients, right? So you're going to be fully booked. But here's the thing, Nick. You spend an hour with your client, right? Usually about 50 minutes. In that time, you do your work, you wrap up, you send them on their way. You immediately take a drink of water, go get your next client, you keep it booking. You're not going to get paid for that hour. Not until you spend another 30 minutes generating paperwork to justify that hour and sending it into the insurance company. So you're going to get paid half for your normal hour, and it's going to take you 90 minutes to 2 hours for every single client to even get that. And a lot of times you have to spend time on the phone talking to the insurance first, saying, hey, can I treat Nick? He's here, he's asking for help, he presents, and they can go, nope, or whatever, even if you're impaneled. And you have to come back to them like every 4 sessions and go, hey, is it cool if I keep helping this person? And like you have to come up with all this extra stuff. So it's so much work. You end up doing twice the work for half the revenue. And if you have debt, if you have student loans, if you've, done a lot of work to get good at this, now you can't afford to do it.
Right.
And so I literally couldn't afford to get on the panels. I was sitting there. I had spent money to get a specialist to get me to this point. I was holding the contracts in hand. I had to decline every single one of them and shred the contracts. And they knew I would.
Yeah.
That's what they
were
wanted.
counting on it.
They're putting it so low that no therapist could reasonably say yes and work with them. So then they get to say, guys, I don't know what the problem is here. I mean, we're inviting therapists all the time. And they go, why do you only have 2 therapists? God, there's only like 2 that want to sign up with us. That's the weirdest thing.
Yeah.
And so therapists can't afford to do the job. And so there you go. So whenever you call your insurance and you go, I need to see a therapist, it's a 3-week wait. If you want to come see somebody that's out of your network, you can see them tomorrow. But you're paying like a premium for that. So like you're going to pay out of pocket what your insurance would have cost you. And so obviously it creates a two-tiered system where there's one group of humans that have discretionary income that can go get help, and there's another group of humans that are having to use their insurance and wait 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, a lot of therapists are wringing their hands really frustrated with this because we want to just help everybody. We think the system is ridiculous, but there's nothing we can do because we're the people that are doing the job and also trying to get paid for it. So it's really, really messy.
Yeah. I mean, Anonymous, we can definitely empathize with that. It's terrible. And we don't care for the system either.
Yeah. And to tell you the truth, I have a dream that one day it would be really cool if like pod therapy ever became big enough, because we don't, we're never going to get rich on this thing. Like we have careers, like we're going to do our jobs, but it would be really cool if one day we could create like a nonprofit bank account or something that people could donate into, that could become like a pro bono, like pool where like people that are listening to the show that are part of the club or something could like write in and say, hey, will you guys sponsor 3 sessions for me? And like, yeah, like, we have a fund for it. Like that would be amazing.
That would be awesome. As well as even if we got our listenership up to a large enough number where we can impact people.
Right.
Where we have an army of THERAPALs.
Right.
That we can mobilize and we can all advocate the same message.
Right.
So the loud voice gets heard.
Tip the scales. Anonymous, listen, as 2 therapists, it breaks our hearts hearing that you're not getting the help that you need. I would encourage you to do this. Instead of going through your insurance, go on Psychology Today, type in your zip code, pull up the list of therapists in the area, or go on Yelp or type it into Google. If you find one that you like, I want you to call that person and I want you to explain your problem. Hey, listen, I don't have out-of-network benefits, so you're not going to get any reimbursement from my insurance. Do you offer a sliding scale? Some therapists will meet you where you're at and say, I'll tell you what, I'm not going to take money from your insurance. I just want to know you have some skin in the game. Let's do $20 or something. They might just do it for your copay. So ask for a sliding scale. That's option 1. Option 2, ask them if they have any pro bono slots. And so every therapist, in theory, we have a few slots. We have a few slots that we do for free. And, obviously we don't advertise those, but if you call and ask directly and explain the problem, explain your need and explain why you're limited, that's why we have those, is so that we can take care of people that are bumping into the problem. So those are 2 little secrets of the trade that you can use. Ask for a sliding scale or ask for pro bono slots if they have any pro bono slots, and explain your situation to them and tell them why you want to work with them, why that they stood out to you and why you really think that they'd be a good helper. Take it from that angle, Anonymous, and hopefully that will change some of the results that you're getting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right back in. Let us know. Keep us posted on how that's going.
Yeah, great question. I'll quickly.
Insurance is a fucking scam. I'm so angry right now.
I know. I can see the steam.
I can't wait for afterthoughts.
I can see the steam.
You guys are going to record afterthoughts right now.
We should.
You should. Special guest, Jim's on the show. Just listening to Laura scream into the mic for an hour. All right, Nick, that brings us to the end of the show, and we just want to thank our Theraproducers, who are special Patreons. They are the Elite 8, the mysterious and shrouded Illuminati members of our fan club. Thank you, Smitty Scoop, Jake Schneider, Robert Brownie Jr. Mint, Kayla Lansbury, David Datascoop Violon, Judy Schneider, Gray Whitaker, chairman of the board, I'll have you know, and Dr. Ben Has Dirt on Nick Dawn. If you'd like to hear this episode uncut, unedited, and enjoy the special extra content like our book club and discussion groups, please go to patreon.com/therapy, and thank you for supporting mental health. That's all the time that we've got for this week's session. We want to thank our landlords, the Ice Cream Social podcast, and thanks to those who contributed to our show today. We really appreciate it. Remember, pod therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Help us reach others by opening this episode's description in your podcast app and copying and pasting the link provided into your social media. Don't forget, you can find us at facebook.com/podtherapy, on Twitter @PodTherapyGuys, and now at patreon.com/therapy.
Do you want to submit a question to the show? Ask anonymously at www.podtherapy.net or email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com. I'm Nick Tangeman.
I'm Jim Jobin.
Thanks, and we'll see you for appointment next week.